Hello and welcome to this channel. My name is Janet. I am covering the King James's Bible in a year. I'm covering all of the different books. Today I am in the book of Chronicles part 2 and I'll be reviewing today chapters 8 until 11. So make yourself comfortable and we'll get started very soon. So our chapter 8 starts with King Solomon having reigned for 20 years. Now in those 20 years he has built the temple and the palace. The temple itself took 7 years to build and his palace took 13 years. Solomon also rebuilt all of the cities that King Hiram had given him. He was the guy that was helping him craft the temple itself. So he gifted him 20 cities which Solomon has rebuilt, and a lot of the Israelites have distributed and are living in those cities as well. Solomon also seized the city of Hamath Zobath. He built Tadmor in the wilderness and lots more cities where he had storage placed, also places for his chariots and cavalier. Everything was fortified and protected. So he's got a real fortress going around him. That's what he's built in these 20 years that he's been reigning as king over Israel. Now the people in King Solomon's kingdom who have been captured during the wars, so these are the people including the Hittites, the Amorites, the Perizzites, the Hivites and the Jebusites. They were all used as forced labour. Now the children of Israel, the people, the Israelites, they were never forced into labour for doing any of Solomon's work. He usually utilised them to basically take over the reign of the forced labour. So some of them were officials, chiefs, commanders, that kind of thing. Now we also learn in this chapter that King Solomon marries Pharaoh of Egypt, his daughter. And he moves her into the palace which he's built specifically for her as well. Even though she doesn't worship God of Israel, she has her own false god. Now this is going slightly against God's laws, and this is possibly the slippery slope of Solomon's decline. Then Solomon orders that the temple be administrated correctly as according to Moses' book of law, so he's following all of God's laws in terms of how the temple is to be run. He's also ensuring that all the festivals that are laid out in God's book of law be followed too, because this is something Solomon's father requested that he do. We also learn at the end of this chapter that King Solomon moves into the shipping industry and he utilises again King Hiram, who has sailors in his kingdom, so they end up on their first voyage out to Orphia. And they come back and they've acquired 450 talents of gold, which they bring back to King Solomon. And this closes our first chapter for today, chapter 8. Now in chapter 9, the Queen of Sheba decides to visit Solomon because she has heard a lot about his fame, his wisdom and his huge kingdom, and she wants to see it for herself. She's also got some questions for him because she wants to test that wisdom that everybody is talking about. Now when she arrives, it's a grand procession. She has camels with her, her servants there, she's bringing gold, she's bringing spices and precious stones, all for King Solomon and the people. Now when she comes into King Solomon's kingdom, she sees the huge temple, she sees his palace, and she sees all of the abundance around him, all the servants that are there, all the gold. Everything is just so opulent and like amazing. It's like totally exceeded her expectations. And then when she asks him all these questions and he answers so eloquently and beautifully, she is just in awe. And she said, wow, the people must be in awe of you working through God and being king over them. She's like amazed with them. And so she gifts him all of the things that she's brought. Well, King Solomon returns her gesture and he gifts her even more to take back with her. So it's like this overindulgent because he's got so much that he can give. And it shows where God is, because when you're following God's laws, this is what happens. So the Queen of Sheba, having been very satisfied with what she's seen, returns home with all her luxuries given by King Solomon and returns back to Sheba. It also notes in the book of law written by Moses that if you do adhere to God's laws, that other nations will honour you and glorify you and see you as great and God as well, And that is exactly what happened here when Queen Sheba came to visit. We then learn here of Solomon's income every year. He makes 666 talents of gold every year. That's his base salary. On top of that, he has the silver and gold coming in from his merchant voyages out to sea, plus the kings and governors of Arabia send him funds too. So he's making one heck of a lot of money. Also note that 666 is the number associated with him and one other person in the Bible, which we haven't got to yet. So we can see Solomon is so abundant. He has got silver, gold, he's got ivory. He's even made a throne of ivory. All of his drinking vessels and the things that he eats with are all made of gold. So gold is just in abundance for him. And it notes that King Solomon surpasses the wealth of any king on earth. So that just goes to show you how abundant he is. Nobody else has his prosperity. And also wisdom, which is like two amazing things to have. Now it notes here that the rest of King Solomon's acts are in the book of Nathan the prophet. So we'll be referring to that as we move on. We haven't covered that yet, so we'll learn more about King Solomon there. And we close chapter 9 with it saying that King Solomon reigned for 40 years over Israel. Then he dies, and he's buried in the city of David where his father was buried. So he's buried alongside his father, and then his son is the new king to be reigned, and his name is Rehoboam. So this closes chapter 9. Now in chapter 10, the elders go to Shechem along with King Rehoboam. Well, he's not king yet, because that is why they are going to Shechem. They are going to anoint him the new king over Israel. Now Jeroboam is from the Ephraim tribe, and there's a backstory about this guy who is at the moment in Egypt. Now he's there because King Solomon was going to kill him. Why? If you've read the book of Kings, you will know. He basically was told by a prophet that he was going to start reigning over 10 of the Israelite tribes. Now, King Solomon heard this prophecy and decided he wanted to have him killed. So he fled to Egypt. Now he's found out King Solomon is dead, he now returns to Jerusalem. So there is a bit of negotiation going on in Shechem. King Rehoboam, soon to be, is asking the elders, what do I do? How do I reign over the people? And they said, be kind to the people and the people will be kind to you. Okay, he takes that advice and says, okay, give me 3 days, off he goes. And he consults with the younger advisors that he's grown up with and asks them, how do I reign over the people of Israel? And they look at what his father did, who was quite false in his taxing of the people. So they were paying quite high taxes, and the people don't really want to keep paying this. They're hoping that things will ease off now that King Solomon is no longer here. But the younger advisors, they think, no, crack the whip even harder, make them pay more, that will keep them under control. So he goes back to the people in Shechem, they're all gathered there, and he basically comes out and says this. He follows the advice of the younger ones and says to them, cracks the whip and tells them that things are going to get harder, so you can imagine they weren't really happy. And then he sends his tax collector to go over to the Israelite tribes to collect the monies. Well, they don't want to pay, so they stone the tax governor to death. And thus a rebellion has started between the 10 tribes of Israel and the 2 Judah and Benjamin tribe. They stay loyal to King Rehoboam. So the king flees back to Jerusalem, King Rehoboam, with a rebellion on his hands. And the chronicler writes that the rebellion has been against the house of David to this day. And that closes chapter 10. So chapter 11 opens with King Rehoboam back in Jerusalem. He's with his army now, the Judah and the Benjamin tribes, and he's trying to get them together to create this army of 180,000 men to go towards the other tribes and get them back in line so that he can reign over the whole of Israel again. Now, God obviously doesn't want this, so he uses the prophet Shemaiah, and he tells them, God says, do not go against your brethren. It is forbidden not to go to war with them. And the people listen and they go back to their homes. So King Rehoboam, with his tribes on his side, he's got Benjamin, he's got the Judah tribe. What he does now is he fortifies all the cities around him. He's like getting this protection going. So he makes sure that he's got oil and food and wine in each city, that it's well surrounded. They've got shields there, they've got swords, they've got ready for attack basically from any of the outsider tribes now, those 10 tribes. He's got his little kind of enclosure, feeling safe, being king in that land. Meanwhile, on the other side of camp, the northern side with the 10 tribes there, they have a new king in town, and that is Jeroboam. Now he's king over their land. They want him king because the other king was giving them too many taxes, but he's now worried. Oh, what if I don't become good enough and they go back over to that tribe? What am I going to do? I'm going to create some fake gods. So he does. He creates 2 golden calves. He's got other fake gods going on there. He builds high places. It's so they're going to worship that and they'll stay around him. So it's a political way of keeping the people around him. So both kings are in fear. Both kings are not being spiritual to the Lord. They're not really strengthening themselves. They're weakening themselves. So Jeroboam, the new king on the northern side, he decides he's going to create his own kind of, like I've said, false gods, but he's also going to create his own sort of festivals, different dates, and he's going to have certain priests that he's going to appoint. So the priests that are in the Levite tribes over there are not happy because they basically have been rejected from their duties. They're not following the God of Israel, so they up and they go back to the southern camp over that way where the temple of God is. Now we learned that over back on the southern side, we're going back and forth, we learned that the Judah tribe becomes strong because they do make their king, Rehoboam, strong because they follow God's laws for 3 years. So we have a strong camp going for 3 years. Will it keep that way? We know it doesn't, but at least 3 years they have abided by God. However, having said that, we now learn as the chapter comes to a close that King Rehoboam marries. Does he marry one wife? No. How many does he marry? He took 18 wives and 60 concubines. So as you can imagine, his family increased. Now, if you want to read the whole names of the new sons that were born and daughters, check out the link under this video for chapter 11. It's all listed there. One thing to note at this final part is that he did love one wife more than all of the others, and her name was Macha. And he loved her son the most, Abijah. He wasn't the firstborn son, and he decides to make him chief leader over his brothers, and he will be the next in line to be king. He also distributes the other sons that he has into different fortified cities and makes sure they have enough abundance and resources around each of the sons. So this closes our final chapter for today. Now we can see again the decline of King Rehoboam by doing this. This is exactly what his father Solomon did. You know, married way too many. One wife, that's all they need. They don't need all these wives and concubines. So this is the decline of this side of things. We can see on the other side of the camp, we've got the northern tribes now really worshipping false gods to quite an extent, which is one of the worst extremes in terms of God's laws. So this is the slow decline. We've had such a raise of the Israelite tribe when they were with Solomon. You know, they were getting to that height. It's almost like the power, and that is when things started to slowly, the corruption starts. So look at your own lives. Do you see that around you, where people have got so much wealth, so much knowledge, all of these things? Still, it doesn't seem to make them happy. They don't seem to follow that spiritual path, which is the most important in life, right? If you want to succeed in life, follow your spiritual guidance. So, that's what I've taken from these chapters. You may have taken something totally different, which is why we're all so unique in this world. So I hope you found these chapters interesting and useful, and I'll carry on tomorrow working through the Book of Chronicles Part 2. Hope to see you there soon. Take care now. Bye.